A Court of Queens by Emery Brown. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. A Princess and a Thief. Gia looked over her shoulder and spotted the man in the Royal Guard uniform behind her, like a shepherd dog wrangling a stray. She had just taken 3 consecutive right turns. He was following her, and he was getting too close for comfort. She ducked into a crowd in the bustling marketplace and hid amongst a group of women wearing similar head covers. Once there was an opening, Gia bolted down an alleyway towards a dead end. She ran up the alley wall, lunged off a windowsill, and hoisted her body up to the roof. She laid flat on the roof and peeked her head over the edge, looking down at the market. The tall royal guard towered over the crowd. He walked through the market, searching around each vendor stand. She watched as he passed her position. Lost him. Gia celebrated to herself. She flipped onto her back and looked up at the clear sky for a moment. Standing to her feet, she noticed the royal guard pulling himself onto the roof. "Ah, shit," she muttered. The guard dashed at her and lifted her onto his shoulder. "Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide," the guard taunted. Gia hammer-fisted his back and shoulders, shrieking with laughter. Okay, you made your point. Put me down." Aldine dropped Gia back on her feet. The stubble on his face scratched Gia's arms as he set her down. "That was quick thinking, jumping onto the roof like that." "How'd you find me?" Gia asked. "Because you were admiring your own handiwork when you looked over the roof." Aldine pointed at the bazaar selling mirrors. "I could see you pretty easily from there." The scalding desert sun reflecting into Gia's eyes from the mirror added injury to insult. "Damn." "Not bad. You could be out here on your own pretty soon," he said. "Don't mock me." "I'm being serious." Aldine extended his palm out. "Should we go check the time?" he offered. "Sounds good to me." Gia and Aldine descended off the roof. Aldine whistled for Fosse. Sure enough, a sturdy camel trotted through the crowd to give them a ride. They rode into the heart of the capital and admired the view from the maintenance wing of the clock tower. Aldine sat in the clock's frame, enjoying the view from the glass window. Gia marveled at the gears inside the tower. The view was rather boring for someone who's lived their entire life at the top. "I wish the Royal Navy was still a thing. I'd join that in a heartbeat," he said. "You'd make a nice meal for the equestrians." The vicious savages would have plenty of tender meat on his arms, chest, shoulders, calves, and thighs to devour before they scraped his bones clean. "Maybe, but at least I could kill a few of them on my way out." The hour hand shifted and the bell underneath them rang. "Should we head back? It's getting late." "Do we have to?" she groaned. Daughters and Dynasty. Gia sat on her balcony gazing at the capital. From up there, the city was minuscule and the crowds of people in the bustling marketplace were ants swarming about in a colony. The cozy small towns in the outskirts looked like cramped dwellings, and the shanty towns scattered amongst the desert were fake, places on a map she could see but never reach out and touch. She peered down at the courtyard, watching the royal guards stand right outside the gate, motionless as figures on a game board, pretending to be doing something important. Like clockwork, they would rotate positions. The guards outside the gate would enter the courtyard and seek refuge in the shade away from the blistering sun. A caravan approached the front gates. Inside the transport was Hundar, Gia's cousin. He was likely visiting to discuss the details of his 13th birthday party. All of the guards at the castle, even the ones basking in the cool oasis, presented themselves for his arrival. They assembled in 2 parallel files, just in case they needed to protect Hundar from scraping his knee or being bit by a mosquito. Hundar disappeared beneath the queba of the festival hall. The domed roof of the corridor was painted vibrant blue with a geometric pattern. A golden cap sat on the peak of the dome. It wasn't even noon yet, and she already wanted to race Aldine on the rooftops again. Unfortunately, the rules that governed the castle were not rules at all. They were a strict authoritarian command. The dictators enforcing them kept Gia under their iron thumb, and they rationed fun very scarcely. There was a knock at the door. Speak of the devil. Dania, Gia's mother entered the room carrying a dish with 2 teacups on it. "I've brought you your chai." She set the dish on the table. "Oh, thanks," Gia said, slightly confused. "Is the maid sick or something?" "Oh, I didn't want to burden them with such a small thing," she said dismissively. Gia was skeptical, and she made no effort to hide it. "What? I can't have a cup of chai with my daughter now?" Dania said defensively. "I didn't say that," Gia grumbled. She apprehensively sat at the table and spooned some honey into her cup. "So I was talking to Sareen. You know the Ayads, right?" Dania asked. Gia nodded and squinted her eyes. She had a hunch about where this conversation was going. "Well, they're looking to buy some more land," Dania said. "Cool," Gia muttered apathetically. "Anyway, while I was there, I spoke to her nephew Ahmed. He's such a nice boy. I think you'd really like him. I was thinking about having—" "Ugh, here we go again," Gia groaned. She dropped her spoon in the cup. The metal clanked loudly against the porcelain. Her chair screeched against the wooden floor as she jumped to her feet and marched over to the windowsill. "Please, I don't mean to press, but if anything happens to you, it's far too late for me to have another daughter. You're our only hope to keep this blessing going," her mother begged. Gia refused to turn around or make eye contact. She folded her arms and huffed through her nose. Dania continued. "Look, I wouldn't ask this of you if it weren't important. But this isn't for me. It's for our future, our legacy." Gia massaged the sides of her head. "What do you want me to tell you? Oh, sure, I'll marry what's-his-face and you'll have a new grandbaby by next autumn. Why can't I be a little more selective about who gets added to this grand legacy of ours?" "Gia," her mother sighed. "I felt the same way you did when I was your age. But as I got older, I realized it's not about being happy. It's about being satisfied with the choices you've made. The crown, the lamp, they come with responsibilities and sacrifices." "Okay, Amu," Gia said, in a tone that suggested she understood her mother's point, but truly she was just tired of arguing with her. They've had this same conversation more times than Gia could count, but it never goes any differently. She hugged her mother, and Dania squeezed the sides of Gia's arms and smiled. "Can you send Aldine in here? I want to talk with him," Gia said. "Of course, honey." She planted a kiss on Gia's cheek. Her mother turned to leave the room. Then she stood in the doorframe for a moment. "You know, if he were a noble, he'd be perfect. Tall, strong, not ugly. I can't remember the last time he fell ill. What a shame." "Believe me, I wish," Gia smiled. "Careful." Her affable demeanor vanished faster than smoke in the wind. "Words have meaning. Words have power. Especially that one," Dania warned sternly. "Of course, Samu. I know." Truly, Gia didn't know. She didn't know how or why, or when a sentence starting with "I wish" conjured the jinn to enact a blessing, or why every time she tried she saw 0 success. But she was certain Dania would never fully explain this to her. More than likely, Dania would just scold and reprimand her for crossing a line that was too faintly drawn in the sand for Gia to see. The sound of clanking armor approached the room, and the guest knocked on the door with a melodic rhythm. Gia opened the door for him and returned to sitting on the alcove. Aldine dropped his sheath on the table and then peeled off his gloves and uniform, revealing a long white tunic underneath. He yawned as he sat down and stretched his legs. "You care if I finish this cup?" he asked, pointing at the tray on the table. "Knowing Amu, if I'm not pregnant, it's probably poisoned," she said. "Even better." Alden took a long, slow sip. Gia stared out the window and just thought to herself for a moment, perhaps a little too long. "So what's wrong aside from the usual?" he asked. "Just my mom being my mom, you know. Oh, honey, daughter this, heir that, blessings, gin, yada yada." She mimicked her mother's voice and mimed a yapping mouth with her hand. "Oh, so the usual. Feeling a bit smothered?" he guessed. "Yeah," she confirmed. "Night ride later?" he suggested with a massive grin. "You read my mind." The room was a theater. The table was a stage of maps, scopes, globes, and scrolls. In the backdrop was a bookshelf holding an archive of history in each bay. Behind him, his brothers and sisters served the same duty. And in the foreground, a jabbering voice rambled on about late 4th century farming techniques. Gia couldn't even pretend to be paying attention. She struggled just to keep her eyes open. Gia found the black beetle crawling up the leg of the table much more interesting, and she hated bugs. But for now, she would let this one live, for as long as it would entertain her.
"Princess, are you paying attention?"
the scholar asked. "Yes, of course." Gia yawned. "How could I not be? This is all so thrilling."
"Well, if you've been paying attention, you'll have no problem telling me when the floating garden became common practice, and who was queen at the time of the invention."
Gia scratched her chin, pretending to ponder the question deeply.
"The queen at the time was someone I'm related to, the third, and the era it was invented in was a long time ago."
The professor rubbed the bridge of his nose and huffed indignantly.
"Gia, history is very important."
"Why? If I could just wish for all this knowledge to be in my head, wouldn't studying it right now be redundant?"
The
professor sighed.
"I'm not sure it would work. Maybe it's not such a good idea."
"You're the scholar. It's your profession to know these things."
"Yes, but knowledge of the djinn and its wishes are above me. It's no one's business but the queen's."
"Apparently it's above me as well," Gia muttered under her breath. The professor flipped the book back a few decades to where he presumably lost Gia's attention.
"Let's continue with the lesson."
Gia wasn't listening before, but now the professor's words fell on completely deaf ears. She cut off whatever useless nonsense he was explaining.
"So you spend all your days studying and teaching my family's history, but you know nothing about the most important part?"
The professor looked up from the text for a moment, but he ignored her comment. Gia slapped her hand on the table as she stood.
"I have an idea. Why don't we do some hands-on learning today?"
"I'm not sure what you mean."
"Aren't you tired of reading history? Why not explore it, feel it, touch it?"
Gia pointed skywards towards the depository at the top of the tower, where her family kept all their blessed artifacts and a collection of the kingdom's most cherished treasures. She had never seen the inside with her own 2 eyes, but if anyone had a key besides Dania, it would be the royal historian.
"Your Highness, that would be treason."
"No one has to know," Gia whispered. The professor slammed his book and shoved it back in his satchel.
"That's enough for today. Let's continue when you're ready to learn."
He marched out of the library. "I was kidding. I was just Gia desperately clutched at the air, hoping to sway his opinion, but the professor had already slammed the library door shut with force. She hoped their little conversation wouldn't leave this room. Gia left her professor's lecture early just to attend her mother's lecture, or scolding rather, an ill-advised trade.
"If you are ever going to command rules, you have to learn to follow them first,"
Dania shouted. "I was just curious," Gia defended.
"That is not something you need to be curious about.
Do you want me to be a good queen?
Or do you want me to just follow someone else's orders for the rest of my life?"
Gia asked. Dania had no response but a frustrated huff.
"I, for one, am glad our daughter is smart enough to ask the right questions,"
her father chimed in. Dania glared at him with venom in her eyes. "Hush," Dania snarled. Her father stood down and was silent for the rest of the conversation. Not a word, not a squeak, not even a whimper.
"Listen, honey, I'm not angry at you for being curious. You're just not ready yet. You may think you are, but I promise the day will come. It's just not today."
"Okay, Amu." Gia gravely regretted her curiosity, but she did learn something from the lesson. She learned it was never her professor's intention to teach her history. He was there to teach her obedience. Unfortunately, she simply would just never learn. At midnight, when the royal guards were working on a skeleton crew, Gia left a bright purple beacon shining in her window. After a few minutes, Aldine entered the courtyard on camelback. Gia removed the rug, revealing a trap door hidden in the floor. Inside the compartment was a steel anchor screwed into wood. She reached under her bed and grabbed a long rope attached to an iron hook. The hook held the anchor tightly, and Gia propelled down the side of the castle.
"So, where to?"
Aldine asked, pulling Gia onto the camel.
"Let's go to Botany."
"That shithole? Why?"
"I've never been there before. I want to see it."
"I don't know. That's a sketchy place late at night."
"Please."
Aldine sighed.
"Fine. Just keep your head down and stay close."
They stopped by an old run-down wooden tavern with nettles and vines running up the sides of the structure. Gia approached the entrance. An old toothless woman dressed in rags sat on the ground outside the bar. She shook a cup and rambled something incoherent as Gia walked past. Gia stopped and leaned over to talk to her, but Aldine pulled her by the arm towards the door.
"Hey!"
Gia exclaimed.
"She's just some crazy old beggar. Don't pay them any mind."
"But she needs help. Just let me give her a little coin,"
Gia pleaded.
"No, I didn't bring much. It's not smart to carry a lot of money around here."
Gia folded her arms and her eyes narrowed under the head covering.
"Look, you wanted to see everything. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, this is the ugly. Try to get used to it."
Aldine immediately avoided her gaze like he regretted what he said, or at least the way he said it. His tone switched to apologetic.
"Come on, let's go get a little buzzed."
He nudged his head towards the entrance.
"All right,"
she shrugged. They went inside and sat in front of the barkeep.
"2 Alsma ales, please,"
Aldine ordered, tossing him a coin. The barkeep served 2 hefty mugs filled to the brim.
"Cheers."
They clinked their mugs together. Aldine took a long swig from his cup.
"Ah,"
he steamed. Gia took a small sip and grimaced.
"Ah, people actually drink this stuff?"
"Yep, not as good as the fancy wine you guys have in the capital. But a pint for a dirham, you can't go wrong."
Aldine rubbed the beer head off of his lip.
"It must be an acquired taste."
Before Gia could finish her thought, Aldine had left his seat to go chat with a lady sitting alone at the bar. The lady put a glass of spirits in his hand, and he flirted with her in exchange. How nice of Aldine to bring Gia all the way to Botany just to buy her a cup of disgusting swill and abandon her for the night. The barkeep noticed Gia suffering through sips of her drink.
"Not a beer person?"
he asked jokingly.
"Apparently not,"
she said.
"Here, let me sweeten it for you."
The barkeep squeezed fruit juice into her cup and then handed it back to her.
"Try it now."
Gia swirled her mug and took a cautious sip, but to her surprise, it was delicious. A night and day difference. The juice added a refreshing, tangy sweetness.
"Wow, that's amazing. What did you put in it?"
The barkeep handed her a small orange ball.
"What the hell is this?"
"It's a fruit. It's called I can't remember what the guy calls them. I just call them oranges."
"I've never seen one before. Where'd you get it?"
"From a trader in Manjar."
The barkeep went back to rinsing pitchers and mugs. Gia tilted the fruit in her hand and rubbed her thumb against its porous peel. Her concentration was snapped by the sound of Aldine laughing at the lady's joke, which probably wasn't even that funny. Since Gia had started the conversation with the barkeep, the pair had scooched closer to each other. They might as well have been sharing one stool. Gia kept the orange ball fruit in her pouch to show Aldine later. His attention was occupied at the moment. On the ride back to the castle, the conversation with the barkeep never left Gia's mind. She wanted to show Aldine the fruit, but now wouldn't be a great time for it. In the meantime, there was another conversation she wanted to have.
"It seems like you and that girl really hit it off,"
Gia said.
"I guess. Didn't think about it that way. I was just having fun."
"Well, I'm glad one of us did."
Gia said, as bitter as the ale she could still taste on her tongue.
You wanted to go to Botany, not me.
Because I thought we were going together. I didn't know you'd be giving me a ride there.
Do you want to be out on your own, or do you want to stay attached to my hips the whole time? Pick one.
I just wanted to have a good time with my friend. That's all.
Gia grumbled.
Sorry,
Alden muttered after some silence. They finally reached the castle and Gia grasped the rope hanging from her window.
Come around when you get the chance. There's something I want to talk to you about.
Sure thing.
He turned the camel around.
Good night, Gia.
He strode off. That night, Gia hardly slept a blink. She couldn't stop thinking about Manjar and what the barkeep told her. She stared at the cliff separating Al-Bukhar from her ocean, wondering what was really going on out there. Tunes and Tall Tales. The next morning, Gia joined her parents at the dining table well after breakfast had been served.
How nice of you to finally join us,
her mother said. Gia had no response but a yawn. Her eyes were half dead.
I hope you weren't up late getting into trouble.
You have no idea, Gia muttered under her breath. Her parents shared a glance.
They're opening a new school and a boutique. We want you to give a speech at the ceremony,
her father said.
Sure, whatever.
Gia shrugged.
Is that a yes?
Dania said.
You don't have to if you don't want to. I don't really care either way. It's just...
Gia thought about facing yet another crowd of faces she would forget soon after speaking to them, regurgitating a speech she hadn't written, filled with empty words that she herself didn't even believe in. How could she? The djinn they revered so deeply was as much a mystery to her as it was to any common peasant in the crowd, so why should she benefit so greatly from its existence? Fate? Destiny? Chance? Luck? She sighed.
How long am I going to keep doing these petty chores? When am I going to start doing real work? I'm not a little princess anymore. Gia, you shouldn't worry about that kind of thing. You have plenty of time to grow into your role. Don't rush it,
Dania said.
Ah, but I should have an heir as soon as possible. That I should rush,
she said. Dania huffed a deep breath through her nose. Her father stared at his plate and there was dead silence at the dining table for a moment.
How does the djinn work?
Gia asked finally.
It doesn't work. Not for us anyway,
Dania said.
Well, enlighten me then.
Dania carried on eating like Gia hadn't asked a question.
It's not much of a tool. It likes messing around and playing games,
her father explained.
Games? What do you mean?
Like when Rendina V was sitting on a rug playing with her toys all the way on the other side of the castle. She yelled, "I wish I could fly," and the djinn made the rug fly.
That's how that happened?
Seriously?
Gia laughed. Both her parents nodded. Her father enthusiastically. Dania begrudgingly.
So, where did the tale about the lost traveler come from? Is it just made up?
She asked, but neither of them had an answer for her.
Are all the stories about the djinn made up?
Gia, darling,
Dania sighed.
You're missing the point.
The djinn is the least important part of queenship. It's most useful as a symbol, like a crown or a throne. As long as people are fed, sheltered, and entertained, our position is guaranteed. But we don't keep everyone fed and sheltered. Most people. Enough people,
Dania clarified. Gia walked out into the courtyard where a pair of royal guards were waiting for her beside a caravan attached to 2 camels.
Good afternoon, Your Highness.
The guards bowed to her. Gia had to stop herself from rolling her eyes at the gesture. She had forgotten royal guards were required by law to salute or bow to her as their superior. Aldine only did so when he wanted to poke fun at her, and now she couldn't take a bowing uniform seriously anymore.
Where's Aldine?
she asked, hoping that these uniforms were just there to deliver the caravan.
He's attending to other business right now. We'll be escorting you,
the guard said.
Oh, wonderful,
she said, trying not to sigh. The guard opened the caravan for her. She stepped inside and stretched her legs on the fine silk cushioned seat. As the carriage started, she skimmed over the speech her mother wrote. She could hear her mother's rigid cadence and shrill voice through the ink. Just the thought of those words coming out of her mouth made her shudder. The speech could do with some improvising. The scent of grilling meats tickled Gia's nose as they passed by a few street vendors. She peered through the window and noticed Mufsa selling his honey cakes. It had been a while since she had one, and her mouth was watering at the thought of it.
Hey, stop the wagon for a second. Stop the wagon,
Gia ordered the guards.
Is everything okay, ma'am?
The guard asked anxiously.
I'm fine, I just want a snack.
Gia fiddled with the handle and opened the door of the carriage. The guard rushed to the side of the caravan and slammed the door shut, trapping her inside.
What is your problem?
She exclaimed.
I'm sorry, Your Highness, but I can't let you out. It could be dangerous. Whatever you need, we'll go get it for you.
Seriously? I've talked to Mufsa plenty of times. I didn't need your protection then, and I don't need it now. Let me out, please, she ordered.
Granted, she hadn't been to the market without a head covering on, but now was as good a time as any to publicly endorse Mufsa's exquisite honey cakes. A small crowd was starting to form. The presence of a carriage and a royal guard made it apparent someone important was being transported. Passerbys gawked, trying to get a good look at the passenger. The whole ordeal was attracting much more attention than Gia wanted.
Fine, go over to that vendor and buy me some honey cake.
Pay him extra, too.
For the inconvenience.
Yes, Your Majesty.
The guard approached the vendor while the other kept onlookers at a distance. Gia smiled and waved at the onlookers and passerbys, trying her best to keep a scowl at bay. Truly, she felt rather embarrassed, being coddled and carted around like a fragile toddler. They treated her like she was made of glass and a stiff breeze might shatter her into a million pieces. The desert might flood before she ever knew a taste of independence. She wished Aldine was the one to escort her. What was the point of being a queen if she couldn't even be treated like a person? The guard handed her the pastry, and they carried on to a boutique, but Gia hardly felt like eating it anymore. All she wanted to do was give the damned speech and go home as fast as possible. Gia entered the lecture hall where a small audience of parents, new teachers, and future students were waiting for her. Gia forced a smile and waved as she walked past them onto the stage. She shook hands with the principal and addressed the audience.
Hello, welcome everybody to A Boutique Primary School. I hope you all enjoyed the tour of this beautiful campus. I know I did.
A blatant lie. Gia hadn't been anywhere near the campus until today and only stepped foot in this building.
I was so excited when I heard about the plans to open a new school.
Another lie. Gia didn't even know about the construction until this morning. Maybe her parents mentioned it before and she didn't remember. She bent the truth at the very least.
I wish a nice school like this was here when I was your age. Maybe then I would have spent more time learning and less time trying to convince my parents I was too ill to attend.
Gia forced a fake cough. A few parents shot a knowing glance at their young children. Another lie. The tutors came to the castle to teach her and her alone. However, the will to attend school in a classroom with other students was a sincere request that her parents never granted.
So, to the students attending at the start of the term, study hard. To the teachers, good luck. And to the parents of the students, enjoy your break for as long as it lasts.
The room shared a mutual laugh at each other's expense, and Gia left the stage. Before leaving the campus, she mingled with some of the parents and students. Not all of them, the ones that mattered. The handful of noble families whose donations financed the construction of the building. Specifically, the Connassi family, who made the largest donation, so demanded the lion's share of her attention. Their youngest interrupted the conversation to hand Gia a painting she made. The painting was of Gia, holding a golden lamp, standing beside the castle. Gia crouched to meet the girl's eyes.
Wow, did you make this all by yourself?
She asked the child. The girl nodded with a big grin.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna frame this when I get home, she said.
If I could have one wish, I would want to be a princess, just like you.
Gia faked a smile as she stared at the girl, unsure how to respond to her. It's normal for children to have grandiose dreams and aspirations, but that wasn't far from the realm of possibility. Call it chance, call it fate, or destiny, or dumb luck. Whatever the reason, nothing tangible explained why Gia found herself in the position she's in right now, with the power and influence she possesses. Maybe in another life, the Kanasis would hold the Jinn's blessing, and she would be looking up to their daughter. If Gia were honest with herself, she would trade places with that young girl in a heartbeat. Being in a noble family would be an upgrade compared to being royalty. All the luxury, but none of the responsibility. But the responsibility must fall on someone's shoulders. It should fall on someone who can bear it. Maybe the universe chose correctly. Perhaps Gia was meant for this. She patted the young girl's head.
Maybe someday,
Gia said. The girl smiled brightly, and her eyes swelled with hope. There was a knock on the door, Aldine's signature melodic rhythm. She opened the door for him. He wasn't in his Royal Guard uniform this time. He wore a short-sleeved gray tunic that showed off the symbols and mantras tattooed on his forearms. His face was freshly shaved, and his hair was trimmed recently. Royal Guards were expected to groom regularly, but his colleagues insisted that Aldine spent too much on his barber. Gia had to agree, but she couldn't deny that Aldine had a face well worth investing in.
Come in,
Gia offered. She took a seat at the table, and Aldine sat across from her. Gia felt very conflicted about how to approach the topic, which manifested in stammering while she gathered her thoughts.
If this is about the other night, sorry.
Aldine started.
No, you're fine. I'm glad we went there. I have something to show you.
Gia retrieved the orange fruit from the secret compartment in her floor and handed it to Aldine.
Citron? What about it?
I've never seen one of these in my life.
Seriously?
He said incredulously.
These are everywhere if you know where to look.
So, how'd they get here then?
Aldine shrugged.
I've never seen a citron tree now that you mention it. I guess it's one of those things that's smuggled.
Smuggled?
Gia grabbed the fruit from him.
I have to show this to Amu and Abu. We have to put a stop to this.
She started towards the door.
Wait.
Aldine stood in her path.
I don't think that's a good idea.
Why?
Because without smuggling, people would starve.
What do you mean? Our farms produce plenty. Plenty for you. Plenty for nobles. What about everyone else?
Gia took a deep breath.
Fine, I won't say anything. But take me to Manjar.
Why would you want to go there?
Gia held up the citron.
Because the barkeep said he got this from Manjar, so I want to see it for myself.
Aldine sighed.
I really don't want to go there.
Why? Are you scared? She taunted.
Yes, you should be too.
Well, that's too bad. This isn't a request, it's a command.
Oh, you command me? You command me now? Well, I guess since you command me...
Aldine heightened the pitch of his voice.
Well then, I'll wish for it.
Gia bluffed.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Fine, I'll wish for the Jinn to make you bald,
she threatened. Aldine shielded his scalp like he'd been wounded there.
You wouldn't dare.
Dare? I would. Do you really want to take that chance?
So you're saying you're willing to potentially ruin both of our lives just to get your way?
Yes.
I can't fucking stand you.
Aldine sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Night terrors. That night, Gia set the bright beacon on her windowsill and scaled down the tower when Aldine arrived. He held out his hand and pulled her onto the camel with him.
I thought you weren't gonna show,
Gia said.
What kind of royal guard would I be if I didn't put your life in danger constantly?
Exactly.
They rode until they reached the town called Manjar, which wasn't much of a town to speak of at all. Manjar was a makeshift slum of shacks and shanties built into the side of a cliff. Aldine tied their camel to a post, and they descended the creaky wooden steps into the juggy. Beggars slept in hovels crafted from discarded boats and shipping containers. At the bottom of the cliff was a hastily built port on the shore, housing a few small fishing boats and some traps.
Is this what you were dying to see?
Aldine asked. Gia noticed a sea cave just a stone's throw away along the coast.
There, I want to go there,
she pointed. Aldine groaned, but ultimately complied. They walked along the rickety dock towards the sea cave. The closer they got to the cave, the less reliable the boardwalk's integrity. Planks of wood were either missing, broken, or rotten. Eventually it became unwalkable.
Looks like we might have to swim the rest of the way,
Gia said.
Are you okay with swimming?
He asked.
Yeah.
They dove into the water and swam into the mouth of the cave. Dim moonlight illuminated the inside. As they ventured further, Gia swam past the largest boat she had ever seen in her life. Inside the cave was a massive port with multiple levels connected by staircases and ladders. The port housed an armada of small boats on the lower levels. The upper decks held goods, shipping containers, carts, and wagons.
Whoa,
Aldine muttered. They swam to the lowest level of the dock and pulled themselves up by the ladder. Up on the second and third floor of the port, Gia inspected the shipping boxes and noticed the Mojave Farm name and logo on the container. And not just one box, not just one rice sack. Dozens of them. In the distance, a large boat sailed through the narrow cave river. Gia and Aldine hid behind the crates. As the vessel came closer, a cluster of faint green lights shined from underneath the water. The boat came into view. 2 men were sitting on the vessel rowing. One of the men had a complexion Gia had never seen before. His skin was a light pale color, and his hair was orange. The sailor must be from either Essex or Batavik. She had seen what those people look like, but only in old paintings, never in person. The sailor slowed down to dock the ship. The luminescent glow from underneath the water approached the surface. A group of humanoid creatures peeked their heads out of the water. They had long braided black hair and brown skin, just like Gia and Aldine's, albeit with a scaly, snake-like texture and translucent film over it. Each of these humanoids possessed a unique pattern of colored scales on their bodies, predominantly on their arms, legs, and neck. They dwindled their bioluminescent light and approached the vessels.
Those are fucking equestrians. Why aren't they running?
Gia whispered, her heart pounding. The men must have been led into a trap. The equestrians surrounded the ship and boarded it. Gia closed her eyes and braced for the inevitable carnage. The equestrians shouted, laughed, and spoke. They spoke Alia, or a dialect of it, with a strange accent on top of that. However, it was easy for Gia to understand them. Even the pale foreigner spoke a few words she could understand, despite his thick accent. The equestrians helped tie the boat to the dock and carry the crates. When they finished, one of the sailors used a crowbar to pry open a container. He pulled 2 glass bottles from the crate and handed them to the equestrians. They opened the bottles and smelled the contents. The sailors and the equestrians passed the bottles around to share. The men all sat for a moment, drinking spirits, smoking tobacco, and playing cards. Once they had their fill, they picked a few small boats from the lower deck and paddled to the main port.
We should leave,
Aldine whispered.
Good idea.
Gia and Aldine approached the castle's courtyard. The wind on her drenched clothes made Gia shiver, and the shock wasn't helping her nerves at all. She dismounted the camel and grabbed onto the rope. She perched her foot on the cobblestone and then paused.
Can you come up here with me?
She asked Aldine.
I can't. I have please? Yeah, all right. For a little while, he said.
Gia pulled herself up to the window, and Aldine followed behind her. She searched through her wardrobe for dry clothes.
Don't look, I need to change,
she ordered. Aldine covered his eyes and faced the wall while she disrobed.
Okay, you can open your eyes,
she said finally. Aldine sat down at the table and took a deep, exaggerated breath. There was a brief silence between them before they addressed the elephant in the room.
They look a lot more human than I expected, if I'm being honest,
Aldine said finally.
Yeah, and a lot like, well...
Gia rubbed the back of her palm and then twiddled her hair.
Us. Yup.
Aldine nodded his head with a wide-eyed expression.
And the language they speak sounds just like old Alia,
Aldine interjected.
Exactly. Something about it isn't right. Can you pick locks?
Gia asked.
Maybe. Haven't done it in a while. Why are you asking? I want to get into the depository where we keep the gin and all the other stuff. Why is there a lock on it in the first place? It's not like anyone can steal it. There must be something in there my parents don't want anyone to find, even me. Maybe we'll find the answer in there.
Aldine held his hand on his heart.
I am a reformed thief. I know, but technically we're not stealing anything that doesn't already belong to me. That's a fair point. Do you think I'll get hanged if we're caught? Aldine asked. They'll have to hang me first.
Be careful what you wish for. The pins were set, and the lock clicked. Aldine pushed the creaky wooden door open, and they stepped into the dark abyss. He waved the torch to clear the spiderwebs from their path. In the distance, there was one small candle flame illuminating the corner of the hall. They stepped closer to the dim light, and in front of them was a podium with an old dusty book atop it. Gia blew a cloud of dust off the cover and opened the book. Aldine held the torch over her shoulder.
What is it? He asked. I'm not sure. This is where we keep all the blessed artifacts, but I've never heard Amu or Abu mention this one. These aren't just trophies. Cool.
Aldine wandered off, taking the torchlight with him.
Hey, wait!
If Aldine was anything, he was distractible. Gia picked up the book and followed Aldine to keep the light in view, not paying particular attention to where she was going. She felt her foot land in a dense paste. Aldine lowered the torch to see what was below their feet. A scatter of embers flew off the torch onto the substance. The ember sizzled, melted, and evaporated it. It was candle wax. Gia approached the candle at the peak of a wax mountain. She held the book up to the light and continued reading. Aldine blew a full breath out at the candle. The flame flickered, but it didn't extinguish. The breeze distracted her from the text.
What are you doing?
Gia said.
I just wanted to see if it would go out. It's been burning for centuries, so clearly not. I was just curious. Either hold the torch steady or go be curious somewhere else. I'm trying to decipher this.
It was no surprise after a few seconds of standing around, Aldine opted to wander the room and find something to keep his attention. Probably a sacred and priceless artifact that he would play with like a toy. Gia turned her attention back to the text. The book's pages were filled with handwritten notes and dated entries. It was a diary. She looked at the first few pages, but the language was too dated for her to understand properly. She flipped through the journal until the language became more recognizable, and the entries were only 500 years old or younger.
Hey, I think this is a list of all my family's past wishes. Like, look at this one. Annika VI wished to hear and speak every language in the world, and what she got was an enchanted necklace that let her understand and speak with anybody. There's a necklace over there.
Aldine pointed to a pedestal with a shoulder mannequin mounted on it, wearing a gem-encrusted necklace.
Is that what it does? That's amazing. I think so, but look, her daughter, Vanny VIII, made a wish for the necklace to only speak Gaelic, Anglic, and Batavik. Strange. Why would she change her mother's wish? He asked. Might have something to do with this. Mom can speak to every creature, every being, every life on this planet, but I'm not sure she understands humans anymore. End quote, Gia said.
Oh, shit. When the Jinn said anybody, he meant anybody. Hey, do any of the wishes mention time or a watch artifact?
I don't know. Why?
I got this watch stuck to me.
He held up his arm, which now had a wristwatch with a solid leather strap and no buckle to loosen it. Aldine tried to pry his fingers under the strap and force the watch off, but to no avail.
Piece of junk. It doesn't even work.
He turned the dial and his body transformed into a translucent crystal structure. Aldine touched his face and knocked on the side of his head with a closed fist. A loud clink echoed through the depository.
Whoa!
Gia awed. Aldine used his gem fingers to spin the dial again. His skin transformed into a rigid rocky texture, and molten magma dripped from the cracks in his surface. Blazing heat radiated off his body. Aldine spun the dial, and his body stretched into a giant with blood-red skin, 4 arms, and just as many eyes. Aldine used the nails on his massive fingers to turn the dial once more. He transformed into a blind mutt with orange fur. Aldine scratched at the watch, which was now a collar around his neck, with his paw. He barked at Gia for help.
What? What do you want? You want to turn back into a human?
Gia said in a motherese tone. Aldine barked at her.
You know, you make a really cute dog.
Who's a good boy?
She pet his head. Aldine whined and scratched at the collar more aggressively. All right. Gia spun the dial until the hand hit 11. Aldine became a man again. Lying on the ground, he panted and hyperventilated. He quickly unstrapped the watch from his wrist and threw it away.
Fuck, that was crazy. Yeah, maybe you should stop touching things.
Okay, look, don't touch. Look, don't touch.
Got it, he said, rising to his feet. Gia went back to reading the Diary of Wishes, and Aldine went back to inspecting the artifacts.
There, I knew it,
Gia exclaimed.
Knew what?
My parents said we never used the Jinn for war, but we have, right here. Sutra II made a wish for the Al-Naqib kingdom to fall.
I've never heard of that place before, so I guess the wish worked.
It says right here that Al-Naqib didn't fall. It drowned. What the hell is that supposed to mean?
No clue. Maybe it's just an old saying.
He turned back to the artifact he was currently enamored with. A model ship inside a glass bottle from the looks of it.
That's bizarre. There isn't another wish recorded for another 100 years or so. Hadera the 4th, Soya the 5th, Sabha the 9th. None of their wishes are in here. The next recorded wish was for a ship that would never sink, and for the men aboard to have a safe voyage. But the ship was lost. Wait, no. It washed up.
Aldine walked up to her and held the glass bottle up to her eye level. The bottle was halfway filled with water, with a miniature wooden ship floating inside it. Tiny, shrunken men were aboard the boat. Aldine tilted the glass bottle, and the men stumbled on the deck as the ship rocked back and forth. When the tide settled, the men formed an audience and looked up at them, as if they were omniscient gods looking down on them.
Oh, so that's how that wish went,
she said. Aldine tilted the bottle up and down, north and south, intrigued by the artifact. The men's tiny voices cried out as the miniature vessel swayed.
Come on, put 'em down. I'm sure that I've stuck in that bottle is bad enough without you messing with them.
Fine,
he grumbled as he put the bottle back on its display.
This stuff is good, but it's all ancient history. Maybe you should look at some more recent wishes. They might tell you more.
Gia flipped through the journal until she reached a largely blank page. The note on the page was in Dania's handwriting.
My mom made a wish,
Gia said.
You say that like it's surprising.
She never mentioned using a wish. That seems worth mentioning, right?
Aldine shrugged.
Maybe it didn't go well.
Gia read her mother's entry.
We've tried and tried to have a child, but it's been fruitless. I fear our bloodline will end if I can't bear a child, and the Jinn will find a new master when I'm gone. Today I wished for my womb to conceive a healthy human daughter. I have no idea if this wish will work or not. I'm sure the Jinn will twist this wish against me. but I don't have many other options. Only time will tell. The wish was a success. I am with child. My daughter was born a healthy human baby girl. No curses, no tricks. If you wish to repeat this wish, use my words exactly. Holy shit. My mom used a wish to make me. So she wished for a headache? He laughed. Wait, you're being serious? Where does it say that?
Aldine rushed to her side and looked over her shoulder. Gia pointed at the entry.
She was having trouble bearing a child, so she made a wish to be pregnant with me.
Aldine mumbled.
Well, there's no way to know if it worked or not. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Women used to drink elixirs, pray, or sacrifice livestock for fertility. That doesn't mean it worked. But this wish was granted around a year before I was born.
Gia sighed.
If the wish did work, was I born, or was I spawned with magic?
Gia felt very uneasy in her skin, and nauseous, like her life had been a lie, or perhaps her life shouldn't have begun in the first place. Aldine placed his hands on Gia's shoulders.
I wouldn't think about it if I were you, okay? What matters is you're here, and you're alive, right? Remember what we came here for. Focus on that.
Gia took a deep breath and collected herself.
Okay.
She nodded her head. She turned back through the text to read more entries. Aldine went back to exploring the small museum.
Oh, what the fuck?
Aldine yelped in surprise. He staggered back, knocking the golden lamp off its pedestal. The artifact rang as it crashed to the floor. "What the hell are you doing?" Gia hissed.
The rug! It's flying!
He pointed at the floating carpet as it shook dust off itself like a dog drying its fur.
Yeah, it does that.
Gia scooped the lamp from the ground. A tingling vibration ran through her entire body, and she froze in place like a statue. "Gia? Gia, you okay?" Aldine swiped his hand in front of her unresponsive face. Gia remained frozen. Her mouth hung open, and drool leaked out. Moments later, Gia's eyes began darting around in the back of her head. Her cheek and neck muscles spasmed.
What the hell?
Aldine whispered. In the distance, a pair of angry footsteps marched up the stairs towards them.
Hey, Gia, if you're in there, I need you to wake the fuck up. Someone's coming,
Aldine said, shaking her shoulders. The marching footsteps grew closer and closer. The sounds of rapid ranting rose the spiral steps. Gia finally broke from her trance.
What happened?
She muttered. Danya and her father burst into the room, cursing.
You stupid girl! Do you have any idea what you've done?
Danya screamed.
Yes, I do, and I know exactly what you did too. You lied to me. You lied to everyone,
Gia screamed.
What are you talking about?
Danya cried.
The equestrians. I saw them with my own eyes. They look just like us. They speak just like us. Explain that. Right now. Tell me. You don't know what you're talking about,
Danya shouted.
Yeah, I do. You know what else?
She pointed at her father.
You said we've never used the djinn for war, but that's a lie too. You wanna explain that one?
Her father sighed.
Look, all we've ever done is try to protect you. Then stop. I don't need protecting. I need honesty. I wish you would just stop and listen to me.
Her mother and father were petrified with terror in their eyes. Billows of blue smoke escaped the lamp like a tea kettle. The blue steam became thick and filled the room. Before long, they were up to their knees in a thick fog.
Oh no,
Gia muttered.
I didn't mean that.
The entire room fogged up with a dense blue vapor. Gia tried to wave through the fog, but it was no use. She couldn't see a foot in front of her face.
Mom? Dad? Aldine?
I'm here, he called out. The smoke dissipated quickly. Gia and Aldine were alone in the room.
Where did they go?
She asked in a shaky voice. Aldine pointed up. Gia looked up at the ceiling. The mural of her ancestors had a portrait of her mother and father among them.
Mom? Dad?
"Oh, hey. Good morning, Gia," Dania said. The painted tiles that made up her mother's face slid up and down the ceiling while she spoke. Her tone was so upbeat and her cadence so relaxed, as if she had completely forgotten the conversation they were just having.
Aldine, is that you? Oh, it's always so good to see you. Would you like to join us for breakfast?
Dania asked.
Ah!
Gia screamed.
What have I done?
She repeated over and over, hyperventilating.
Hey, relax. Just breathe. Just breathe. We can fix this,
Aldine said.
Oh, did you have a nightmare, honey?
Her father asked.
Why? Why did that wish work? I've never been able to make wishes. Why did that work? Because you touched the lamp, sweetheart. That's how the 3 wishes get passed on. The djinn is yours now, her mother explained. Okay. Djinn, come out. Show yourself.
A formless blue fog escaped from the lamp. A bright sphere of light was in the center of the creature's mass.
Holy shit.
She stared at the entity.
What are you seeing?
Aldine asked. Gia ignored him.
What did you do? Explain yourself.
The djinn didn't speak. It vibrated, buzzed. But somehow, Gia could understand it.
I did what you desired. You are no longer a prisoner to your parents, and they can never lie to you again.
Are they dead?
No,
Can you freeze them?
I can't reverse wishes.
How long will they be like this? Are you talking to the djinn right now?
Aldine asked.
Eternity.
Oh, fuck!
Gia sobbed.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
She cried.
Do they know they're trapped?
No, they're happy, blissfully ignorant.
Do they know everything my parents knew? Do they remember being normal? Having bodies?
Yes, to them, reality hasn't changed. They remember everything that's happened. They are not angry, but they don't understand why they are not angry.
Gia looked up at the mural, at her mother and father, their souls trapped in a curse. Strangely, when she looked closely at the mosaic tiles that made up their eyes, she still saw a human behind them. Those eyes still felt, still thought. They focused on her. They even blinked periodically.
Okay. Mom? Dad? Where did the equestrians come from?
Gia's father looked over at Dania.
Do you want to tell her, or should I?
I'll tell her.
Of course. You always tell stories so well. Anyway, carry on,
her father said cheerfully.
Back in 758, the kingdom was split between Al-Buqa and Al-Naqib. Al-Naqib wanted their independence. We needed their resources, their parts. So to avoid a bloody civil war, Reyna IV wished for their kingdom to fall. But she wasn't clear enough, so Al-Naqib flooded instead. At first, she thought it was a success, until all her ships were destroyed when they trod water. The Al-Naqib people became equestrians, and now they sink our ships for cursing them,
her mother explained.
Why didn't you tell me this?
Gia asked.
I didn't see any reason to,
her mother said.
And if she wasn't going to, I wasn't,
her father added casually.
Were you ever going to tell me?
She asked hesitantly.
No,
her mother said bluntly.
Probably not.
Her father shrugged shoulders that weren't there. Gia felt like her heart had fallen into a bed of thorns. Maybe Dania was never as human as Gia thought, but now she could no longer hide it. How was she her mother? Gia wasn't sure if she wanted to weep or scream. Everything was a lie. They all lied to her with a smile on their face, and she would never have gotten the truth unless she forced it from them. Her parents didn't deserve this. She was just angry at them, but this was their fault too. They could have just told her the truth, but now it's too late. They're gone. Perhaps not dead, supposedly alive, but certainly of no use to her anymore. Gia was alone, wielding a blessing she hardly understood. She just stared at the djinn through a lens of tears. This must be a dream. It has to. This is what the djinn does. It twists the will of dreams into the stuff of nightmares and then grants those nightmares passage into reality. Gia wiped the tears from her eyes. We have to get out of here. We have to leave. We have to go far, far away, she begged Aldine. And go where? Aldine said. I don't know, but I can't stay here. If anyone finds out, it'll be mutiny. They'll say I'm a witch. I'll be dead before the sun goes down. Do you understand? Please. Gia blubbered, and she began hyperventilating again. Hey. Aldine pulled her in tightly. As long as I'm alive, nothing is gonna happen to you, okay? Aldine held her face in his palms. But if we try to flee, how far do you think we're gonna get? We'll be as good as dead. What about Galia or Batavik? Maybe their blessings can fix this. Do you really want to bet your life on that? Aldine said. What choice do I have? Either I fix this or they kill me. Okay, he sighed. I'll go get my camel and some supplies. Wait for me. I'll be back at the castle before the sun rises, okay? Gia gripped Aldine's wrist so tightly that he visibly winced. Promise me you'll come back. Promise me you won't just run and leave me here. Gia, listen to me. I would never. We're in this together now. I'll be back. I promise. Okay, go. Gia released his wrist. Aldine dashed out of the depository and scurried down the spiral steps. Gia looked up at the ceiling. Her father had his reading glasses on. He looked down his nose at the book in his hands. He brought his finger up to his tongue and turned the page. Dania's vision was focused on a task in front of her. Knitting, Gia guessed from her expression. Oddly, the two of them looked happier and less stressed than she'd ever seen them before. Hey, Mom? Dad? Yes, honey? Yes, sweetheart? They said. Dania set the garment down. Her father placed his bookmark and shut his novel. I need to go for a while. I'm not sure where, and I'm not sure when I'll be back. Gia cleared her throat, doing her best not to choke up. But when I get back, everything's gonna be okay. We'll all be together, and it's all gonna be okay. I promise. But Gia, we are together. Everything is okay. But enjoy your trip. Dania smiled warmly. I will. Gia buried her head away from her parents' view. She grabbed the lamp, the book of wishes, the necklace, and stuffed a purse with gold coins. Goodbye. Gia descended the tower. She went back to her room, threw on a plain black niqab, and stared out the window waiting for Aldine to arrive. By sunrise, the courtyard would be filled with an army of peasants waving torches and pitchforks, ready to kill their witch and take a new queen. In the distance, a man riding on a camel slowly trotted toward the castle. Gia scaled down the side for what could be the last time. Aldine offered his hand and pulled her up. So, what's the plan? She asked. There's a smuggler in Batni. He hangs out at the Silver Tongue. If we hurry, we can meet him there and have a chat, he said. How do you know this smuggler? Aldine purposefully ignored Gia's question. Okay, never mind then.